everybody to this webinar, which is part of the Consob Sapienza academic seminar series. It was a series which was actually opened by Consob's president, who is here with us today, and we welcome him very warmly. And it started last November. This is the fourth webinar, and it is my utmost pleasure to welcome you all and to pass over the word to Professor Strangio, who is the Dean's Delegate for Internationalization. And she's also a member of the scientific committee of the academic seminar series, because unfortunately, Professor D'Ascenzo, the Dean, could not be present today. At the same time, I would also like to pass the word directly to Commissioner Conforti, who joined Consob in February 2022. He has an extensive background in technology, so he's very knowledgeable in the field that we're going to touch upon today, which is artificial intelligence and its applications to asset and wealth management. So, Professor Strangio and Commissioner Conforti, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Professor Marina Broggi. Good morning, everyone, especially Professor Paolo Savona, Commissioner Carlo Conforti, and all the important speakers who will take turns today during this very high-level webinar. I just a short words. I bring you the greetings of our Dean Fabrizio D'Ascenzo, who is unable to be here with you, but he has begged me to bring you his greetings and welcome you to our faculty. Also about the webinar, but we would like to have you in presence next time. I thank you very much, Commissioner Carlo Conforti, for his time and his disposal to be here today, and Professor Marina Broggi, who organized always important events for our students, such as these academic seminars, thanks to which we have the opportunity to have as some and one of the most important prestigious international and national institution. The topic today, artificial intelligence, asset wealth management, is a very current and attractive, and I think that increases our knowledge in this fascinating field of artificial sector. I thank a lot another time. All the important speakers will take turns today during this webinar, and I apologize with you and with the Professor Marina Broggi and Professor Dr. Conforti, Professor Savona, and all the important speakers, but I cannot hold back and participate with you in the webinar because my students of the course of history of the bank and the financial crisis are waiting me in the class. Thank you so much, and good job. Welcome to our faculty.
So I will hand over. Thank you, Professor Broggi. Thank you, Professor Strangio, for your kind words. I think from my end, I would just, let's say, make a few introductory comments and then handing over to Professor Broggi for the real introduction. The very first, let's say, assumption of this webinar is what we have been witnessing, I would say globally, but also in Italy, of course, about the importance and the emergence of artificial intelligence in the various techniques, including machine learning, that is one of the supporting techniques for, let's say, the using financial intermediaries and asset management overall activities. Now, beyond the benefits that these activities, broadly speaking, bear on in the interaction also with the clients and the users, there are also emerging risks. Some are completely new, others are to some extent exacerbated by these new techniques that raise, of course, the attention of and the scrutiny by regulators and supervisors. That's why, let's say, particularly in the recent years, artificial intelligence has been brought under the attention of legislators. I would just remind to all of you the European Commission intervention, digital finance, and on artificial intelligence, but also regulators and policymakers and supervisors witnessed by the intervention by IOSCO. IOSCO is let's say, well represented today by Alp Eroglu, who is the senior policy advisor at IOSCO. Thanks for him for having joined and accepted to deliver the introductory speech later on in this webinar. Now, this webinar shows, I would say, the strong interest by Consob on the field of technological innovations. This strong interest is also confirmed by the presence of our president, our commissioners in the college. So that's something on which we, broadly speaking, devote a lot of attention. We devote a lot of attention for two reasons. First, because whatever is happening in the market, by definition, raises our, let's say, call on making sure that the regulatory framework is always adjusted to new developments, particularly technological developments, but also that new technologies and the risk that these bear, let's say, do not go against the principles that underpin our intervention, particularly investor protection. The second, of course, these technological innovation are driving also our own activity, both in supervision or for our own internal activities, and including efficient decision-making process. We are still in the process of, but of course, I can only underline how this is important as reminded in our strategic plan for the next few years. Now, this said, before handing over to Professor Broggi, just let me remind three topics, among others, there are of course myriads, and the debate will intervene in many, but I would just underline three aspects of the topic that in my view are paramount. The first is the importance of machine learning, artificial intelligence techniques in the overall efforts that asset managers are conducting in meeting the sustainability objectives of portfolios and in supporting the investment decisions on behalf of their clients. The availability of amount of data that is uncomparable to, let's say, previous times, and the availability of techniques that can look through these amount of data, let's say, is an asset, of course, but also the fact that it needs to be explained and would need to be evidence raises other questions. I will come back in a minute. The second is the development of robo-advice. This is also to be discussed later on in the seminar, and the need to find, I would say, a balance between its benefits, the perceived complexity, the objectives of investor protection. It is not an easy balance to be struck. Knowing that there may be a good push, let's say, for financial inclusion, also driven by the low cost that robo-advice is presenting. So I would say not all is dark and not all is light. There is some balance to be struck, but interesting developments. And the third, that is probably a way that, let's say, cuts across all developments, is the need to ensure that these techniques are underpinned or developed within a framework that gives the sufficient safeguards. I always try to put these in terms of what we traditionally in terms of financial, say, business and or risk management and supervision we do under the validation of internal models. I think that artificial intelligence should not escape from applying similar techniques that we know that would go through, let's say, validation of data, the performance of the algorithm, analysis, back testing before getting in production and having the necessary validation steps conducted internally in due governance. So with these, I'm sure that the webinar will address these and other topics. I will now hand over to Professor Broggi for the real introduction. Thanks again for all.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Conforti. I think that you have touched upon many of the issues which are key in this domain. Before I hand over to Alperoglu from IOSCO, who is the international standard setter for securities regulators, just a few opening remarks on this academic seminar series. So the idea that originally sort of came to mind from Consob and Sapienza was to create a series on new frontiers in financial markets and financial regulation. And the purpose is to create a context where our students and researchers can be inspired from regulators, supervisors, and academics from all over the world. We have decided for this year to maintain the webinar approach because this is more flexible and enables us to host people from all over the world. And some of our students are international, and we have a number of master's degrees which are just taught in English, and some of our students are still abroad and can actually take part from their respective countries. And so, as I mentioned, regulators, supervisors, academic researchers, students can actually take part, and the former can share their different experiences and stimulate, ideally, research questions with the relevant policy implications so that we can actually have more advanced research on specific topics. I think that AI and machine learning, which is basically about data and the quality of data, is very, very important. I think it is on the frontier. I remember when I spent my time in the stakeholder group at ESMA, robo-advising was just starting to emerge. It was indeed, I think, 6 years ago. So now it's a much more clear and interesting, even though it's still cutting edge innovation in the financial market. I think we have two very strong papers which are going to be presented today and discussed by eminent discussants. One is devoted to robo-advising and how less artificial intelligence per se and more explainable artificial intelligence. But Marie Brière is going to explain her paper much better than I can. And there's going to be a discussion by Diana Capone from now IVAS and formerly from the Bank of Italy. And she's written very well on the application of artificial intelligence in corporate governance. And then we're going to listen to a very interesting paper on how artificial intelligence is applied, used by the asset and wealth management industry in Italy. I think it's a very interesting paper. I think Consob should be commended very, very highly for the number of important papers that they write. This is an exercise which involves 8 large asset managers belonging to groups representing more than 60% of the asset management in Italy in the first quarter of 2022. So it has a part of description of what is happening, but it's very important because it taps and analyzes the majority of the market. And of course, as we all know, savings and the way Italian savings are managed is absolutely key, as saving is one of the key ingredients in the strength of the Italian economy. So it's very timely, a very nice paper, and it will be discussed by Professor Paltrinieri from Cattolica University. The concluding remarks are going to be by Nadia Linciano, whom we all know, and whom I thank very, very much, because she, with myself, Professor Nascenzo, Francesco Fancello, Valentina Lagasio, Professor Panetta, Maria Antonietta Scopelliti, Tiziana Togni, Andrea Turi are part of the scientific committee, which have made this academic seminar series so successful and so well attended. So thank you very much for being here. And without further ado, let me pass the word to our introductory speech by Alp Eroglu, Senior Policy Advisor of IOSCO. Alp, thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thanks very much for inviting me and IOSCO to this interesting discussion. As you say, I think this is one of the most important and promising topics which will shape the future. If we can go to next slide. First, I just want to make a little bit like, so to speak, marketing of IOSCO. For those who are not familiar with IOSCO, I'm sure our Consob colleagues know IOSCO very well, because based on my 14 years of experience at IOSCO, Consob has been one of the best contributing members, and I worked them very closely in various IOSCO projects. But just as a broad explanation of IOSCO, we are the global standard setter for capital markets, and as you see on the screen, we have three main objectives, which are financial stability, retail and in general investor protection, and market integrity. So it's a very broad network of securities regulators, some central banks, as well as industry associations and other international organizations from around the globe. So if you look at our membership, it's basically almost the whole world, which is 95% of the global capital markets, and 130 plus jurisdictions. And we also have an emerging markets committee, which is composed of more than 100 jurisdictions. And our principles are taken as guidance by regulators from all around the world. And we also have an MMOU, which is recognized as a benchmark for international cooperation in enforcement. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So here you can see, like, I mean, almost the whole world is IOSCO member. And this map shows that. If we can go to the next slide, please. So here, okay, if we start diving into the topic, as I said, I mean, if I had to choose one particular area of technology to watch going forwards, I would say it would be AI. It is one of the most promising technologies and has a huge potential in terms of its use cases in finance, which is probably a very fertile field for AI application. And I think it's going to be a game changer over the next years. And this may happen very quickly, by the way. But this is going to be a long journey, because finance is a very heavily regulated industry. But I also think that the use of AI in finance, like in various other sectors, will be the inevitable future. So I'm not going into details of so what is the definition of AI, ML. I mean, ML is a subset of AI technology and all those kinds of definitional issues, which I'm pretty sure you are familiar with. But what you see on the screen is really the core issue. Basically, the whole question is for regulators and from a regulatory perspective is how to create a regulatory environment conducive to technological development and innovation, while at the same time ensuring those objectives that I mentioned. Mainly in this case, probably financial stability and investor protection, as also the Commissioner Comporti has mentioned. And we should watch these promising technologies very carefully to avoid any kind of market failure, which might have drastic consequences for innovation. And also it can reputational damage the technology itself, as well as the firms that are using these technologies. So the whole question is about striking this balance that on the question that you see on the screen. We need to devise basically smart regulation rather than a strict regulation, which may stifle innovation. So can we go to the next slide, please? Slide 5. So IOSCO work on the use of AI. Like Consob, we also want to be ahead of the curve when it comes to technology-related issues. And our board identified AI and ML as a priority in 2019 and asked our Committee 3 on market intermediaries and Committee 5 on asset management to work on a project for the use of AI for these, two types of financial market players. And we published our report last year. It's basically a guidance to assist our regulators who want to supervise firms. When I say firms, again, I'm referring to broker dealers and asset managers on the use of AI and ML. So these are the two types of market players, but in general, the principles are very much applicable to other market players as well. For example, if you're a manager of a market infrastructure, a trading platform, or say like an exchange, the principles are equally applicable. And I know the context of today's, or the scope of today's discussion, is on asset management and wealth management. Also, we should keep in mind that market intermediaries usually have those licenses, for example, for investment advice or portfolio management. So it's very natural that the scope covers both market intermediaries, investment banks, as well as asset managers that utilize AI and ML. And we made it very clear in our report that this technology is evolving, and what we publish is basically a snapshot of the situation at that point in time. And we have committed to look into this issue again, and we have to do that inevitably to reflect the necessary challenges as the technology and its application in the financial sector evolves and improves. Can we go to slide 6, please? So why artificial intelligence? I mean, you see all sorts of reasons and justifications in every report. At the beginning, they talk about, the benefits of AI, which we have done also in our report. And you can see this on the screen as well. But I would highlight two very important issues. The first one is, of course, AI helps. AI. When I say AI, again, I'm using the general terminology here. It includes machine learning, deep learning, all kinds of other subtopics or categories. But it basically helps firms to save cost. Basically, the machines can do things faster and more efficient than humans, especially when the volume of data is huge. And then here the question is, and secondly, I think let me first mention that the second most important reason is firms who can harness this technology well will have a competitive advantage on other firms in the same sector. So, and this also boils down to the discussion about big data and firms having enormous volumes of data. So if you look at the unstructured data today in the world, it's increasing with a 40% rate annually, and 90% of that data is unstructured data. Firms who can convert that unstructured data into meaningful signals and conclusions will have a competitive advantage in terms of their positioning in the market, the offerings of their products, their pricing, and their investment strategies. So that is I think the whole story here. That all being said, I think the use of AI may change firms' risk profile, and that's why we need to be careful with this. And the other point I want to make from IOSCO's perspective at the global level is there's a need to avoid fragmentation and regulation. And it's always a big challenge when we talk about technology-related matters. And it always takes time for IOSCO to come up with international standards, because you need things to mature up a little bit at the jurisdictional level. And then you come to a level where you can come with international guidance, because different jurisdictions approach crypto and technology-related topics in different ways. Some are more fintech or technology-friendly or crypto-friendly, whereas others, are more conservative, and it goes all the way from being very friendly to prohibiting, certain offerings of products and services. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, here I think before going into detail, I think it's very important to highlight one thing, which is basically AI systems operate fundamentally different than systems of the past. And they're creating new risks and regulatory challenges, which we'll talk about in a minute. And given these differences, I think the appropriate regulation of AI requires some kind of openness to new models of governance. So it's all about ethics, culture, and governance here, which will be the core point during my presentation, and which is very much relevant to this technology. So if you look at the use cases, that's what we have examined in our work. So we asked firms, intermediaries, and asset managers how they use AI, for what kind of purposes and services. Of course, there are a lot of commonalities, but what we have seen as a general comment was market intermediaries were a bit more advanced in the use of this technology in comparison to asset managers, while we observe a lot of commonalities in terms of use cases, and there were sometimes differences as well. So, for example, market intermediaries, in a very simple form, use these technologies like robo-advisors or automated investment advisors. These are very simple rule-based algorithms, and usually they automate advice system is limited to generating potential advice or asset allocation for the investment advisor to review. So that's probably the pre-stage for the human factor to come in and analyze the findings. And then importantly, we see market intermediaries using this technology for more risk management, including credit risk, market risk, operational and liquidity risk. For example, the systems can help provide early warning indicators of a potential customer's default, for example, from a credit risk perspective. And it can create a dynamic measurement of customers' risk profile to better understand, for example, when to write off a debt. And then we see also intermediaries using it for analyzing volatility trends and to gauge liquidity risk by analyzing multidimensional risk and exposure data. ML algorithms are also increasingly being used to monitor, for example, for interesting different purposes, such as monitoring staff emails inside the firm by using advanced pattern recognition. And importantly, firms are they're under enormous margin and collateral pressure today. They also use the AI technology to minimize their inventory risk and maximize the utility of their balance sheet. The other area that they're using heavily in a very simple form is probably this client identification and monitoring, where they automate their client onboarding. They also use AI for fraud detection, money laundering, cybersecurity monitoring, cyber attack monitoring, and in a simple form for your know your customer related or customer onboarding related functions. The other way of using this technology is the selection of trading algorithms, where market intermediaries offer a software solution to their clients that selects an appropriate trading strategy. And the broker, depending on the market situation and trading objectives, of course, of the client, in line with the best execution purposes. This is often called an algo wheel. And of course, asset management and portfolio management is the other important area. Again, margin pressure is an important concern here on the side of firms. Competition is driving, is a driving factor again. And they use it heavily for asset allocation and pricing purposes. They're using it to forecast asset prices and also, interestingly, to price their new investment products competitively. So basically, the algorithm is looking at how other firms are offering similar products and based on that, trying to determine a suitable price offering for the new product. Can we go to slide 8, please? The next slide. If you look at the use of technology on the asset manager side, it appears to be a little bit more nascent stage when compared with intermediaries, as I mentioned at the beginning. And it's mainly used for supporting human decision making. And they use this quite often for optimizing portfolio management and importantly, complementing human investment decisions, asset managers' decisions, by suggesting investment recommendations. And we see, interestingly, that firms are using also, asset managers are using the technology to improve internal research capacity as well as back office functions, which is, again, as I said, a very simple, traditional, basic function. And some asset managers are also beginning to use AI for order execution, broker selection, and order routing purposes. So if you go to next slide, slide 9, please. Our industry engagement reveals that AI, I mean, we know this very well, intentionally or unintentionally, the use of AI may create certain risks, and importantly, a number of conduct concerns for firms. So the risks you see on the screen is reflected to our guidance as, for example, you see 6 risks, and then we have 6 principles trying to address each of these risks. So the first one is on governance and oversight. And what we saw basically, which was a little bit problematic in our findings, that the firms were implementing AI mostly relying on the existing governance and oversight arrangements. They do not see AI algorithms as generally fundamentally different from traditional algorithms. Of course, there's always an involvement of senior leadership, but with much of the technology still at an experimental stage, the techniques and toolkits at the disposal of compliance and oversight functions currently seemed limited. And then we also have seen poor record keeping inside the firm, resulting in limited compliance visibility. So there's a problem here. And then in terms of the development, testing, and ongoing monitoring, there is not an established framework for specifically developing AI. instead of that, many firms use the same development and testing frameworks that they use for traditional algorithms. And then, it's important to note here that the algorithms may behave unpredictably as they are exposed to new data patterns, and they need to be continuously monitored. And it's important to highlight here that firms need to ensure that they continue to perform as originally intended. So that's where development testing and ongoing monitoring comes in. And data quality and bias, that's a very core fundamental concern or a factor in the functioning of AI as a technology. And the performance of this AI technology is inherently dependent on the quality of the data set. The quality of the data set used in the learning phase can have an important impact on the potential outcomes. This is a key risk which needs to be taken into consideration by firms, and data cleanness is also important, and firms are cleaning data before applying AI technology. And this is also a very resource intensive and difficult task given the amount of data. And transparency and explainability, the algorithms that are should not only be accurate, but they should also be understandable by firms, all types of stakeholders, market counterparties, clients, and importantly for regulators. It is possible that sometimes the introduced risks cannot be fully explainable if there's a black box problem in the algorithm itself. Outsourcing continues to be a concern as well. Some larger firms indicated us that they develop and implement AI and ML in-house. However, small firms usually tend to revert to solutions offered by external providers. And with the increasing use of cloud and these kind of services and the concentration risk in outsourcing, there are all kinds of problems that come with this, where firms really should have a sound contract and they should watch the outsourced functions and the activities of the third outsourced party. And ethical concerns, of course, firms need to ensure that the AI models do not discriminate against a certain segment of the population. And we see very interesting news on the financial press about this, certain races or investor groups are being discriminated inadvertently by the algorithm itself. So can we go to next slide 10? This is something from our FinTech task force, where we have identified 5 primary themes that could underpin the ethical use of AI techniques. And just to highlight here, I think we see a lot of also national and international standards all around the world, which you can see in our report as well. Like, for example, the CFA Institute also has some ethical standards. And today we have counted, I guess, more than 100 these kind of standards and codes or guidance around the world. So if you look at our 5 themes that should underpin the ethical use of AI, first, do good, okay, ensuring the model is being used or acting in good faith in the best interest of the investor, of course, in good consideration of the market integrity. And then secondly, do not harm, having the ability to understand and interpret the AI and ML based decisions to identify where misconduct might be taking place. And then, of course, there should be human autonomy, ensuring humans have the power over what the model can and cannot decide and do. And justice, accountability, and transparency. There should be accountability for the actions of the model at the very senior level. And then explainability, ensuring the outcomes arising out of the models used can be explained easily. Can we go to the next slide, please? Slide 11. Okay, there are potential mitigations or mitigants at the firm level for the risks posed by these technologies, in this case of asset managers or market intermediaries. And this brings us to the question of culture. And I think this is something regulators are always struggling with. And then what is a good culture is a very difficult question to answer to. And some firms might be more aggressive than others, but that might not necessarily mean that they have a bad culture. So it's all like, frisking a wet fish, defining this. And the culture of each firm is different. There's no one size fits all approach. But the key elements of code of ethics can be defined. For example, honesty, fairness, diligence, care, respect for others, and these can provide the foundations inside the firm. And it's very important that senior management sets the tone from the top, and they set the example with their own behaviors for a prudent and appropriate use of AI inside the firm. So it should be like it should come from the top, basically. And accountability is critical, as I mentioned earlier. We see, for example, some regimes in the world, around the world, like the UK's senior managers regime, for example, where they impose that a senior manager should be responsible for the use of artificial intelligence inside a firm. There's a similar regime in place in Hong Kong, for example. And then knowledge, skills, and expertise. Of course, if you're using this technology, you should have inside the firm the necessary skills, knowledge, and expertise to discharge the responsibilities. And it's what we hear from firms is it's becoming more and more difficult to find a really young talent and attract them to their firms. Of course, operational resilience is quite important when it comes to especially outsourcing and third-party service providers. This is a key mitigant as a control. And then client disclosure is the other critical issue. And we have seen that some firms stated that the client disclosures are very important. For example, if you're using this AI technology, disclose your client about how you do that and the potential implications. But firms were asking in our consultation a degree of proportionality. So it should depend, the disclosure should depend, the level of disclosure should depend upon the investment strategy behind the client's investment orders, and also the sophistication and type of the client as well. Can we go to next slide? Yes, so the IOSCO guidance, again, the objective here is providing assistance and guidance to our members in supervising market intermediaries and asset managers that utilize the technology. And then proportionality I've mentioned, and when considering proportionality, actually, it is not only dependent on the size of the firm. This is just one factor. A small firm can also have a material impact on market participants and orderly functioning of the markets. And the report also talks about regulatory initiatives around the world, both by NCAs and international organizations. Can we go to slide 13? Yeah, this is the last slide about IOSCO guidance. We have 6 core principles here. Again, as I said, in response to all the 6 risks that we have identified. Governance and oversight. Firms should have the designated senior management responsible for the oversight of the whole life cycle of the AI technology, which includes, in this case, development, testing, deployment, monitoring, and controls around the AI. And then algorithm development, testing, and ongoing monitoring is critical. And this testing should ensure that the AI technology behaves as expected in both stressed and unstressed market conditions, first of all. And secondly, it should operate in a way that complies with the regulatory requirements or obligations of the jurisdiction. And the use of the technology should be properly assessed and tested in light of all the risks, like, for example, market abuse, data privacy, risk management, cybersecurity, to make sure that the technology works as intended. And importantly, firms should also ensure that there are adequate kill switches, that are kill switch functionalities that are built into the control framework. And adequate skills, expertise, and experience. Of course, if you're using the technology, as I said, you should have the necessary experience to develop, test, deploy, monitor, and oversee the controls over the AI. And outsourcing risks should be managed via service contracts, which should be very clear on the responsibilities of both the firm and the outsourced third party. And there should be disclosure on the use of AI. This should be meaning information provided to the client around the use of the AI technology, and then how it impacts the investment outcomes. And you should, to the extent possible, it should explain also the benefits and risks associated with the use of technology. And data quality and bias, this is a core point, as I mentioned. The performance of the system is largely dependent on data quality and lack of biases in processing. And this may be introduced in the data that is fed into the system, or later on, if there is a machine learning process, for example, the system or the algorithm can get this bias in the upcoming sets of data. And this may jeopardize both firms that are using the technology and their customers due to the risks of discrimination or inadequate investment advice. So that's why firms should have appropriate processes and controls in place to identify and remove unjustifiable biases from the data sets. And firms should therefore ensure an adequate level of data quality by checking the quality of also data sources that are used. So I'll pause here, and I'm happy to respond to any questions that you may have at the end if we have any time. And thanks.
Thank you very, very much for this very, very extensive overview of all the activities that IOSCO is performing and your paper, because it's very, very important to have, you know, a uniform approach to this sort of change and innovation in this domain. So let me pass over the word to Marie Brière, who's head of the Investor Research Center at Amundi. And she's also associated to Paris Dauphine University for her paper on robo-advising, less artificial intelligence and more explainable artificial intelligence, which I think, do you call it XAY? Marie, the floor is yours. We can't hear you though.
You are muted. You should probably check whether it's probably a mic or the headphones. Sometimes I have the headphones.
Yeah, we could hear Marie before, so perhaps it's a momentary issue, which I'm sure we will solve. And actually, this helps me to correct what I just said something very imprecise. IOSCO provided guidance. It's not called a paper. So for my students, that would have been a big mistake. So let me rectify that. So Marie, we still cannot hear you. So I guess it would be best for you to.
Can you hear me now?
Now, perfect. Yes, brilliant.
Okay,
Thank you.
Connected and reconnected. So let me try to share. I don't know what happened to share my slides.
This is to prove that over-reliance on technology we must be very mindful of.
Indeed, yes. And again, my slides disappeared when I don't know what's happening with Teams today, but so let me share the full screen and then put my slides in full screen mode. Can you see my slides?
I think we will see them soon. I can't right now, but I'm very
confident
that we
can see your screen, but not the slides.
But not the slides. Wow.
Yeah.
Because my screen has the slide, and here, if I don't put it in full screen mode,
it's the Microsoft Teams window that is open.
It's very strange. I'm sorry for that.
Marie, maybe if you send me the slides, I can try to show them from here.
Wait, now they appear. Can you see my slides?
Great.
Yes?
Yes.
Great.
Go ahead.
Success. Yes.
Okay, perfect. And now in full screen mode. Okay, so thank you very much. I'm very happy to participate to this very interesting session that you're organizing about artificial intelligence. And I will be presenting a paper which is a joint work with Milo Bianchi. Milo is a professor at Toulouse School of Economics in France, which is entitled "The Robot Advising, Less AI and More XAI," right? So explainable artificial intelligence. So we did several papers on robot advising. I will reference some of our empirical work as well, because Amundi introduced, so I'm part of Amundi, the French asset management company, and we introduced a robot advisor as well. So we could study how people behaved and responded to the introduction of the robot advisor. So we had also some empirical results on how much did that change humans' behavior. So I can touch on that also a little bit. So the outline of my presentation is first to discuss the promises of robot advisors, and then the growing role of AI in robot advising. Here, I will survey what I've been seeing in other platforms, and there are very original stuff that are developed right now. So I find it quite interesting to review them. And last, I will discuss the future of robot advising in terms of what the algorithm aversion, personalization, and also designing efficient human-robot interactions. So first, the promises of robo-advisors. I mean, you all know what a robo-advisor is, and it's an online platform which is providing financial advice and allowing the automated management of a portfolio of assets. So how much automated is that? Depend on robo-advisors. I will come back on that. But what's common to all platforms is that there is this direct digital relationship for subscription, reporting, and also rebalancing of the portfolio. With an intuitive interface, it gives access to a large choice of funds, ETFs, and also the possibility to do an asset allocation and also rebalance the portfolio at very limited cost. So the market is growing relatively fast. Some observers are a bit disappointed by the growth, but the global market is around 1 trillion. It's projected to triple by 2025, according to Statista. How they work, the robo-advisors define goals, then they assess the personal preferences of investors in terms of risk aversion, but also personal risk in terms of income, real estate, etc. Depending on the robo-advisor, they might be more or less sophisticated. And then they construct and communicate an optimal investment strategy, which is typically based on either sample portfolios, so grids basically, or an optimized portfolio, but it's usually very standard. So most of the robo-advisors, I take this picture from a paper by Beketov and co-authors, they made
if I may, we don't see the other slides. We're still in slide 1.
Exactly.
Just for
yeah,
probably
yeah,
so
yes,
should,
so
yeah,
maybe
now it's good.
okay.
okay.
So I will stop the full screen mode. I think there are issues with Teams. So
well, actually, we don't see the full screen mode either. So
okay. So
right now we're seeing full screen right now.
Yes.
Okay.
Now it's working. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I was referring to this graph you can see on the right, which is from this paper by Beketov, where they reviewed all the methods for optimizing portfolio. As you can see, the dominant method is the modern portfolio theory of Markowitz. So it's mostly the most used method by robo-advisors. Some use constant portfolio weights, and there are some other, like Black Litterman is also used quite frequently, but there are not so many fancy techniques, basically, and very rarely artificial intelligence used in the design of portfolios. So that's something we can discuss further. So that's for the construction of the optimal portfolio, and then alerts are sent, or the portfolio can be also rebalanced automatically, depending on the type of robo-advisor, when the individual asset allocation drifts from the targeted one. And that's where there can be different types of robo-advisors. And I take this classification from the European Parliament, and I find it quite relevant. So there are the generic robo-advising platforms that are disappearing in a way that do not consider the personal situation of the client, so that the old style robo-advisors. And the two types of robo-advisors that are now developing are either what the European Parliament calls a personalized robo-advice, which relies on an interaction between the robot and the human. So in that type of robo-advisor, the software provides investment advice, but then the client makes the final investment decision. So you're typically sent an alert, and if you agree, you can rebalance or accept the asset allocation that is proposed by the robot, but you're not obliged to do so. So you remain free to decide in the end what will be your asset allocation. And the last type, and also very popular of robo-advisors, are what we can also call managed account platforms, where the robo-advisor does not need client approval. So the client approves in the first step to choose, the robo-advice, to accept the robo-advice, and then everything is done without any additional consent. So rebalancing, etc., is done without any human-robot interaction. So it's quite interesting, because one important question, in particular for academics and also in other fields than the financial robot advising, is how much should we have human-robot interaction? Is it good or not to let humans interact with robots? And most academics think that there might be a trade-off between trust. People like interacting because they like keeping control, and that gives trust. And also, but potential behavioral mistakes, because humans are subject to biases, etc. So they might implement their own biases if we let them choose in fine. So that's, I think, a very interesting debate to have going forward. Should we develop more the personalized robot advice service, allowing the human-robot interaction, or should we rely on completely automatized platforms, so in the type of managed accounts? And today, both exist. So what are the promises of robo-advisors? The first one is to get an improved client's knowledge and potentially a personalized asset allocation. So you get this client's knowledge from a detailed questionnaire. And sometimes, it's quite rare, but there can be a partnership with a financial account aggregator platform, which gives you more finer information on lending, bank account, etc. A second promise is a reduced bias in clients' treatment. So human advisors were criticized a lot because they are biased. So typically, for example, there were some academic papers showing that women and young people are less well treated by human advisors. So they are less asked about their personal situation, their financial needs, etc. So robot advisors don't have these kind of biases, right? So that's another very interesting promise, that they will treat everyone equally. And a last promise, very important, is financial inclusion, because by reducing the cost compared to human advisors, these new technologies can reach traditionally underserved clients that typically require a lower initial capital to open an account. They charge lower fees than human advisors. And there were already a couple of research showing that they allow to serve these less educated, smaller types of investors. So what do they achieve in practice? I'm referring here to a couple of academic papers that had a look at the impact of robo-advisors. In general, results are quite optimistic. So the people were better off after the introduction of the robo-advisor. Typically, they had the better diversification of their portfolio. That allowed them also to reduce behavioral biases. So that's from the paper from D'Acunto and co-authors. There is an impact on financial inclusion as well. So, for example, this paper by Reher and Sokolinski shows that by reducing the minimum account size, you can reach more middle-class participants, for example. And in our paper with Milo Bianchi, we saw also very positive impact on the population of among these clients. So these are clients from employee savings plans. So typically low education. I mean, it's representative of French people working in the private sector. So we have also low educated people, etc., working in all kinds of sectors in the French economy. And we found that it increased typically their attention to their saving plans, increased their trading, they increased a little bit their net inflows into their savings plan. A very important, I mean, we could call that improvement, because a lot of people were not taking risk at all. So they had all of their money in money market funds. So the robo-advisor allowed them to take more risk. And in average, we found that it increased their asset allocation by 9% in equities, relative to an average exposure of 18%. So it's quite substantial. And also, and that's very important, we found that they increased their rebalancing. So the Amundi robo-advisor is sending alerts and allows the human to freely choose if it will follow or not the alert, and then rebalance according to the alerts. And we found that people were rebalancing, so they were good pupils, right? They were rebalancing after the alerts. And 2/3 of their improvement in performance was coming from their dynamic rebalancing behavior that they were not having before. So individual investors are typically sleeping on their asset allocation, so they let their asset allocation drift, which we know is the bad investment behavior. Professional portfolio managers are rebalancing dynamically, and we know that it's a very important driver of performance, but on their own they would never do that. And if they get these alerts by the robo-advisors, they start doing that, and that's a very substantial part of their improvement in the performance. So overall, from all these results, we see that robo-advisors had a positive impact on saving and investment behavior. So in the second part of my presentation, I would like to discuss the growing role on AI. And here I will rely on, I mean, experience I had. I tried some platforms that are developing, had a quick look at how they're working, and I saw very, let's say, innovative ways, but maybe also raising some questions on the way we should use AI. So I'm just going to give you an overview of what I found quite interesting, but also probably something we should discuss further. So one area of development using AI is to go beyond traditional questionnaires. So the traditional risk tolerance questionnaires are considered as intrusive, boring, time-consuming, and some platforms are trying to develop more original and friendly types of questionnaires that are using behavioral science to assess the suitability of clients for financial risk. And they are based on, I would say, fancy question. I have to say I was a bit surprised from a financial perspective about the question, because they ask you about how you react in your life to certain situation, about your personality traits, etc. And from that, and I don't know how they do that, they derive a risk tolerance. So it's certainly very fun to answer. How they can reliably define a financial profile, I'm a bit skeptic, to be honest. So there are a couple of platforms like this. So Schroeder's Invest IQ, there is MoneyMind, Neuroprofiler, Financial DNA. So that's an example of the type of profiling. So they're showing how much you rely on commitment, protection, and happiness in your life. And based on this kind of question, you're supposed to be profiled. ESG preference is also a field which is rapidly developing, where we see also a lot of new types and yes, new types of questionnaires. A second area of development is what I would call hyper-personalization. Again, if you look at the traditional robo-advisors, they were typically using clients profiling grids. So there was an apparent personalized advice, but in practice, once you were answering the questionnaire, you were sent in a category, a grid, and it was only partially personalized. So recently, some asset managers led partnerships with customized portfolio construction specialists, and with the idea to personalize the portfolio to behavioral traits, personal value, ESG preference. So the holy grail here is the Spotify model. So to be able to personalize the portfolio recommendation, like Spotify creates custom music playlist. How far and how can we go in finance into that model? It's still something to be debated. So one example, for example, is AutoCIO, for example. So they claim that they are able to customize to client sustainability objective using thousands of variables over 4 million strategies available through the platform. Again, there is absolutely no transparency on how they achieve that and how is your profile related to an optimal portfolio. So there is very little transparency on that. The last area, which I would find the most promising personally, is the development of clients' interactions. And that can take several forms. So it can take the form of chatbots, for example, to make customers aware of additional services and offerings, to recommend stocks in specific sectors based on the investment portfolio, to notify clients about, for example, foreign exchange rate in their trading account, that kind of things. And another thing I found very interesting and very promising is also alerts to avoid investment mistakes. There is this Schwab Project Bear project, which uses AI to predict when investors are getting nervous. So it's a part AI, part human program. So AI is screening the client's behavior on demographic attributes, investment behavior. And if the algorithm figures that you have a 60% chance of selling in times of high volatility, so you're a kind of nervous person, and if the market is going wild, you're getting a call by a human advisor. So it's a very interesting case of human robo design, where you get both AI used to screen your profile and then get a call in order to tell you basically don't sell and don't panic. It's a crisis, but it will recover. So if you don't need the money, you should keep calm and keep your asset allocation as it is. So I found that's quite a promising avenue to design these effective clients, human-robo interactions. So lastly, in the last presentation, last part of my presentation, I would like to discuss what should we think about the future of robo-advice and what should be the role for AI. So robo-advisors, they rely on algorithm in different parts of their processes. So algorithms that can be more or less sophisticated. As I mentioned, so far, most robo-advisors have simple algorithms, but we start seeing more fancy things developing. And one big issue is, of course, the algorithm aversion, right? There is a general lack of trust in algorithms. There was this very interesting survey by HSBC in 2019 asking respondents how did they trust technology in various areas of their life. And for example, only 8% say they would trust a robot program by experts to offer mortgage advice, while 41% would trust a mortgage broker, a human one. And the funny thing is that 9% responded that they would trust an horoscope to guide their investment choices. So they were more likely to trust an horoscope than a robo-advisor. So it's quite disappointing result. So this is changing, and also there are large differences across countries. So in Asian countries, for example, there are typically much more trust. But that's certainly something that we should take into account. There is algorithm aversion, and the algorithm complexity is certainly problematic for people having lower financial capabilities. And as Merton famously said, what you need to make a technology work is to create trust. So that's certainly one of the most important challenges for robo-advisors. Trust is key because it has a very strong impact on investment decision. We for example showed that when people trust the robot, when they take the advice, people are able to increase substantially their equity exposure, while it's very, very difficult to make people invest in equities in general. So trust can have a very important impact on financial decision. And we are not the only one to show that robo-advisors allow more risk-taking. And one interesting paper has been showing, for example, the paper by Hong and co-authors, they look at the Alibaba robo-advisor in China. They also document a strong increase in equity exposure, 14%. And they show that this is not a too high equity exposure, that the robo-advisor seems to help people choose the level of risk that is closer to their optimal level of risk taking. And they were able to show, for example, because of the Alibaba data, they had access to all consumption data as well, that people had a better alignment of their investment portfolio with their actual risk tolerance, as they could measure it from their personal behavior in terms of consumption. How to build trust? Explainability is very important. So the possibility to explain the functioning of the robot, or also explain how a given prediction or recommendation is made is very important. So again, in the academic literature, there is some debate on how much should artificial intelligence be explainable. Why this debate? There is, for example, such a debate in the context of self-driving cars, because the psychological research shows when there is a complex decision, using heuristics and ignoring part of the available information helps dealing more robustly with uncertainty, helps taking quicker decisions than relying on resource-intensive processing strategies. And because if it's too complex, there is a risk of information overload. But on the other hand, some experimental studies have shown that if you provide, for example, in the context of self-driving cars, if you provide drivers with information on how the autonomous vehicle acts, it helps maintain safe driving, because in emergency situations, drivers are faster to take control of the car. So providing some explanation is good in that respect, because people are able to react more quickly when something happens. So what about explainability in robo-advised algorithms? I think we have to be careful in that, because explainability doesn't mean we need to explain the full functioning of the algorithm. So I've seen some robo-advising, for example, platforms showing the full detail of the portfolio optimization process, how they were shrinking the covariance matrix when they were making the optimization, etc. That is, of course, something which is absolutely unnecessary for a traditional individual investor. Some might be interested in that, but it's a very minor type of very sophisticated investors. So that's not the kind of transparency that we would like to have. The type of transparency we would need to have is to disclose the global functioning of the algorithm and also its limitations. For example, disclosing the sensitivity of the algorithm to models parameters or economic scenario that might cause the algorithm to perform less accurately. That's the kind of thing that we would need, but that is very rarely shown. Also, another important issue is how to build trust. And on that, one important thing is probably to give control. So a number of papers have shown, again, in other domains, but that algorithm aversion can be reduced if you give people control. There is a famous paper by Didvors and co, so showing that if you give professional forecasters, so you allow professional forecasters to use an algorithm, an artificial intelligence algorithm to forecast, if you allow them to correct the output of the algorithm when they are making their forecast, they are much more likely to choose to rely on the algorithm. So giving control, giving the ability to correct and change the output of the algorithm is something that is very important. And in the context of human-robot interaction, you could, as I mentioned before, send alerts and leave the human the final say on that. Last question is, how far shall we go into personalization? The optimal portfolio choice can rely on various individual characteristics, and we could personalize much more than it is currently done by most robo-advisors. Instead of only measuring risk aversion, we could measure also time preferences. We could measure human capital, because it's also very important in the design of the optimal portfolio, housing market exposure, etc., etc. Should we go into that? Again, it's probably subject to debate. On the one hand, you personalize the asset allocation, which from a theoretical point of view is good. On the other hand, you might rely, people don't know how to answer these questions. They frequently, that's something we observed also in our robo-advisor at Amundi, give inconsistent answers. They tend to reprofile frequently because they don't know. Sorry?
4, 5.
Sorry, I think we have somebody who should go on to mute. Apologies for that.
No problem. So if you over-personalize, there is a risk that people might give inconsistent responses and might not be able to answer accurately to these questionnaires. And then also the risk to introduce parameter estimation error when you're designing the optimal portfolio. So last question is, should robots become complements or substitutes to human decisions. We saw, as I was mentioning in the beginning, that the two models are currently in place in the robot advising space. So the one that consider that there should be complements, so they allow a dynamic interaction with alerts and people reacting to the alerts, for example, and some considering that you should completely automatize it. There are pros and cons for each model. As I mentioned before, the pros for full automatization, if you think that people have low financial literacy, little attention to the saving, they have behavioral biases, it's better to fully automatize. But on the other hand, letting them interact with a robot can also probably allow them to increase their financial literacy, learn from the robot, and we could also gain feedback about the client's behavior. So there are pros and cons for both models, and it's not completely clear so far which model is better. So to conclude, what should be the next generation of robo-advisors? Today, as I mentioned, we see that most robo-advisors use simple procedures. It's first because of a lack of clients' trust, also because of technological and regulatory constraints. So where should we go going forward? Should we go into more automation, more data, more complex model? Or, and that's the path we defend with my co-author in the paper, go more for explainable artificial intelligence, so algorithms that are easily interpreted and evaluated. And also, for me, that's very important, allowing effective human-robot interactions. So rather than full transparency, we would call for the possibility to explain and evaluate the recommendations. And that's a possible way to improve financial literacy, which remains a very important goal in the end. So that's all. You have here the references, if you're interested, of the papers we have, and a few additional references that I quoted during my presentation. So with that, I'm done. Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to listen to the discussion and then take questions.
Thank you very, very much, Marie. Very, very interesting. It's a topical, you raised a number of topical issues and also some very interesting details that I was not aware of. Before I hand over the floor to the discussant, as just a brief introduction also on Diana Capone, as Commissioner Conforti highlighted, there are a number of emerging risks, and then sort of outlined how Tom from the top and board members are going to have a role in addressing the sort of risks that Commissioner Conforti highlighted. And the reason why I asked Diana Capone to join us today to discuss this very interesting paper is because she's an expert. She's one of the first people I know who wrote about the governance of artificial intelligence. Her focus was in the insurance companies. She has a background, also a legal background, which I think is very helpful. And she highlighted issues, ethical issues, board responsibilities, and culture, which I think really fits in well with the sort of topics we're addressing this morning. So without giving away one of the, I think the most interesting points that Diana touched in her paper, so I encourage you to read it. Let me give the floor to Diana Capone as a discussant of this paper. Diana, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the floor, Marina Broggi. First of all, good morning, everyone, and let me thank Professor Marina Broggi and Consob for inviting me to discuss this really interesting and stimulating paper. I just want to say that, as you may know, Banca IVAS, that is the institution that I represent today, and Banca d'Italia, that is the institution to whom I still belong, have a strong interest in supporting financial evolution, in the evolution of the digital in the financial market. And I want to mention two tools by which we try to achieve this goal. One is the Milan Hub, that is a virtual and physical place where we can meet to engage in discussion about artificial intelligence. as interesting as the one of today. And the other one is the regulatory sandbox. This is a very interesting experiment because there we can experiment to test a new solution in the financial, insurance and banking sector for a limited period of time, trying to simplify the regulation that could apply to this new initiative. Having this in mind, I can better explain why I'm so interested in the result of this paper that I found really stimulating and thought-provoking, and much more by listening to this presentation, because I had some more insights on the content of this paper and why it would be important for us as a regulator first and supervisor. I think that the paper states very clearly some really important points. The first one is objective, is that there is a growing interest in robo-advising, and we have to presume that this interest will be stronger in the future, and we should be in some way harmed to guide this kind of evolution. The second things that I think in the presentation, but also in the context of the paper, is very clear, is why robo-advising is so important. The why is that because it's better that the traditional professional financial expert, along with several dimensions. I understood the dimension are that it is first of all dramatically less expensive. So it promotes financial inclusion. I think this is the most important thing that I perceived from the paper, but also from the presentation. There is no risk of distortion of incentives. There is the perception by the person who uses the robo-advisor that is neutral. And all these things, I think, will promote at the same time financial inclusion, but also financial literacy. I read between the lines in the paper that there is this connection. I understand better by your words that effectively favoring the recourse to robo-advisor.
No, adesso no.
I think there's someone else.
Sorry, somebody must please everybody check that you have muted your mics. Thank you very much. Apologies, Diana.
Sorry, Diana, now you're muted.
I avoid to have to show slides because of technical problems. Now I'm experiencing technical problems also in speaking. And so I was saying that there is this not immediate connection between financial inclusion and financial literacy that I found really interesting. Then I try not to oversimplify, but I need to underline what are the main statements that I found really useful and interesting in our point of view. I think that the paper also underlined the fundamental ongoing issues and the future issue. I must say that the issue is the complexity, over-complexity of the use of artificial intelligence inside the robot advising. And one example that I have found in the paper is, of course, the use of machine learning, and the fact that using machine learning, the result is that the algorithm become a black box, not easily to understand. The answer to these issues of complexity is to try to make the algorithm more explainable with two objectives. One is to build trust in the sector, and the other one is try to limit the inability of the investor to understand the functioning of the robot advising. In this regard, I have to put what Marina, to make some thinking about and some thought about what Marina was talking about before. I think that to build trust, we need to have intermediaries in general that are trustworthy. We need to build trustworthiness. And to build trustworthiness, we have the three pillars, as usual, in the banking or financial sector. one pillar is the rules, the other one is supervision, and the third, but not the last one, is of course the board of directors. In this regard, we have to consider the solution of having a more explainable robo-advisor or artificial intelligence, have to raise the question, the related question, explainable to whom? I think that it could be a bit too difficult to ask the algorithm to be explainable to the normal people using the service. I believe that now we have also to reflect on the role that regulation, supervisors, and last but not least, again, the board of the intermediaries play in achieving the goal of having in place a fair, ethical, explainable, and transparent artificial intelligence. And maybe I'm biased because I'm a regulator for most part of my working life, but I strongly believe that we have to, in this case, to avoid the danger of applying to a new phenomenon in inherited regulation. In this case, we have to reflect about the possibility of guiding the innovation in order to make the situation positive for everyone. I mean, we need to transform the value creation, to extend the value creation of artificial intelligence to everyone, investors, savers, people that are consumers for the insurance, and try to avoid this phenomenon of the value extraction that now is so common for artificial intelligence, that benefits someone and it's a damage for everyone else. And in this regard, I have to cite what Commissario Conforti, I think, told at the beginning. We do not need a strict regulation. We definitely need a smart regulation. In this regard, I want to mention the proposal that now is discussing in the European Commission about the regulation on artificial intelligence. I want to say that I'm not advocating a specific rule for robo-advising. I'm just talking in general about a rule about the use of artificial intelligence in the financial markets. I think that the resistance mostly of the insurance sector, I think, to be included in the scope of application of the regulation on AI is not a good choice, because I strongly believe, again, as Marina said, that we have to make the board of intermediaries accountable for the use of artificial intelligence. It means that they should be responsible for having in place an internal organization, an organizational culture that is fit for having an ethical use of artificial intelligence. But I think at the same time, I strongly believe again that we as a supervisor or regulator could not let them alone in facing this problem. So I believe that at the end of the paper, I read a very interesting part in which a phrase that I like to use. You said that it should be necessary to have a collective intelligence to make better use of artificial intelligence. I think that this collective intelligence could be supervisor, regulator, and board of director, board of intermediaries that work together to make the artificial intelligence beneficial for everyone and to promote the use of artificial intelligence, because the alternative is to limit, constrain the use of some kind of artificial intelligence. That's my point. I just want to underline the role of these three important pillars. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Diana. And also we are almost on track with the timing. And so let's move on to the second paper, which is on artificial intelligence application in asset and wealth management. And we have here one of the co-authors who is going to present, who is Valeria Caivano, which I'm going to leave the floor to. So thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Professor Marina Broggi. I will share the slides. Do you see this, the slide in full screen mode?
Almost.
Indeed, yes, indeed.
Okay, perfect. Let me briefly introduce myself. I have been working at Consob since 2008, first in the financial analysis unit and then in the economic research unit. I'm in the economic research since 2011. I contribute to studies and research activities on topics related to financial markets, but I also contribute to several periodical Consob reports, including the report on trends and risks of the Italian financial system in a comparative perspective, for which I'm responsible of the analysis related to macroeconomic trends, bond markets, and the banking sector. And I also contribute to a report, our new report on sustainable investing and crypto assets markets, published for the first time in June 2022. Today, I will drive you through one of our studies aimed at gathering evidence on the degree of use of AI systems in the Italian asset management industry. Specifically, I will show you the results of a survey carried out in collaboration with Assogestioni. The results of this survey are described in a paper published in June 2022 in the Consob FinTech series. I will not discuss topics that have already been addressed before, so the growing relevance of the use of AI in the financial sector, the interest it arouses among regulators and supervisors, the ongoing regulatory developments. In this slide, I reported the proposed EU regulation on harmonized rule on AI and the 2021 IOSCO guidance on these issues, only to emphasize the growing relevance of these issues. But let's start with the survey. So the objectives of the survey. With this survey, we gather evidence on the use of artificial intelligence systems in asset management at domestic level. And we also collect opinions on expected benefits and perceived risks related to the use of AI systems. As I just said, the survey was carried out in collaboration with Assogestioni in July 2021, and it involved 8 large Italian asset management companies belonging to groups representing more than 16% of the asset under management in Italy as of the first quarter 2022. The survey is organized in 5 sections, which are detailed in the slide. We tried to cover all the possible relevant issues related to the use of AI in asset management, from strategic objectives to the actual use of these technologies, from issues related to internal organization and governance to perceived risks and expected benefits. So starting with strategy, we asked companies, is the use and or the development of AI systems a strategic priority for your company? And the most frequent answer was yes, it is. Companies indicated several reasons. In the slide, all the graph that I will show you, in all the graphs, the numbers refer to the number of respondents.
And so the most frequently reasons are the development of innovative management strategy, maintaining a competitive position. These reasons are indicated by 6 companies out of 8. Increasing operational efficiency, improving the performance of the investment process and the compliance action are also relevant motivation. Other reasons seem to be less important. We asked also how the development of AI systems fits into the company strategy, and the majority of companies state that research, development, and use of AI systems are part of a general technological innovation strategy. Only one company states that it has defined a specific strategy dedicated to AI. But are AI technologies currently used? In which area are they used? And in which areas are there ongoing AI projects? As of July 2021, 7 companies out of 8 said that they have been using AI for at least 1 year. The full implementation of AI systems in at least one area is declared by 5 out of 8 asset management companies. Among these, 2 companies declared that they have achieved the full application of AI techniques in 5 separate areas. 5 companies also report that they have ongoing projects and that these projects are also in a good stage as they started the pilot test. There are several areas in which AI systems are used, as you can see from the slide. The investment process and the activity aimed at increasing operational efficiency are the prevalent areas. And in these areas, AI systems are fully implemented in 3 companies. Other relevant areas are data management, infrastructure management, and compliance. For which the full implementation was achieved by 2 companies. The investment process is also the area interested by the greatest number of ongoing projects and research for future uses. So focusing on the investment process, in companies that have already achieved the full implementation of AI systems, these new technologies are used for activities in various stages of the value chain, in particular for strategic allocation, and so the choice of investments and portfolio optimization with a long-term view, and for tactical allocation, so for portfolio rebalancing related to short-term dynamics. The technologies most frequently used are machine learning and advanced analytic techniques, which almost always find application at all stages of the investment process. Many other technologies are used. Almost all the companies participating in the survey use several kinds of AI technologies together. Only in one case is machine learning used exclusively. The AI systems in use were mainly designed and developed in outsourcing or in partnership with third parties. And this is mainly due to the need of reducing the engineering and implementation time. As for the products for which the AI systems are used, companies declare that they use AI systems for UCITS funds. The use for alternative funds is less common. 2 companies out of 8 consider these technologies to be less useful for the alternative fund management, mainly due to the relevance of an intensive human involvement that management of this kind of funds currently requires. We also delve a little bit into the use of AI for sustainable investments. All the companies report to manage ESG funds. Only 2 out of 8 declare that they use AI systems for the choice of sustainable investments, in particular for purposes of verifying and analyzing the information contained in the sustainability reports and assessing the consistency of an investment with the strategy aimed at integrating the ESG factors into the investment policy of the fund. One of the 2 companies also reports the use of AI systems for risk management and specifically for the assessment and monitoring of sustainability risks. Moving to the next point, the organization. The survey also investigated whether the Italian asset management companies had already adopted a specific organization in order to better integrate these new technologies in the corporate structure. Results show that many areas, organizational areas, are involved in the use of AI systems, even in those companies that had set up one or more specific dedicated unit. The area most frequently involved in the use of AI systems include portfolio management and the technological development, but also data management, marketing, compliance are relevant areas, while those dedicated to human resources and risk management are less frequently mentioned, are mentioned only by 2 companies. As for the professional figures involved in the development and in the use of AI systems, they are many and diversified. The majority of companies indicate that they rely on data scientists and data analysts, and that they have also identified a chief technology officer. 5 companies indicate that they rely on experts in data processing, so data engineers. And 4 companies have identified a data protection officer. 2 companies identified a chief data quality officer. Another area investigated by the survey concerned the governance of data and governance of the algorithms. The first general view from the answer is that data and algo governance procedures are still evolving. Indeed, companies that have introduced a specific algo governance procedure are only 3, while data governance procedures seems to be more frequent, as they are mentioned by 5 companies. The second general view from the answer is that all the companies are aware of the need for a strong human oversight of decision-making processes based on the use of AI systems. In particular, the use of AI technologies is always subject to human supervision. None of the respondents indicated that they use systems that act autonomously. In 4 companies, human control seems to be very strong, as the AI system has no autonomy or is never used directly to make a relevant business decision. Only in 1 case, the AI system in use is qualified as fully autonomous by the company. However, the company states that the final decision is always under human control. Focusing on risks and benefits, we first ask the companies over what period of time do you think that the benefits of using AI techniques can be appreciated? The majority of respondents, 5 companies, believe that the benefits can be fully appreciated immediately or at an early stage of implementation, or within 3 years at the latest. while 3 companies believe that longer time is needed. As for the benefits, responses show that the positive impact of the use of AI is expected in several areas. Benefits in maintaining or enhancing their competitive position and improving the performance of the investment process are indicated by almost all the companies. The majority, 6 companies, mentioned the increase in operational efficiency and the contribution to the development of innovative management strategies. More than half mentioned the strengthening of compliance action, and 4 companies mentioned the improvement of risk management process. As for the risks perceived, all survey participants indicate the poor explainability of outputs and or algorithms, while half of the sample reports inadequate control, validation, monitoring, and among potential risks, 3 companies also highlight the possibility of bias in data or in the algorithms used. And now let's go through the view of the company on future development related to the use of AI systems in asset management. We asked the companies something about their view on the future in this field. And all respondents believe that in the next 5 years, AI systems will certainly find greater application in investment process. With regard to several activities in the value chain, including the selection of instruments, financial analysis, data management, the identification of new investment strategies, many companies also mention cyber risk and infrastructure management, compliance, marketing. A further area indicated as relevant is the increase in operational efficiency that these new technologies will make possible in the future by improving internal processes related to back office activities and external processes such as the relations with customers and outsourcers. One company also mentions the analysis of ESG factors as one of the possible future uses. Companies identify technology and regulation as factors that in the next 5 years will most influence the intensity of the use of AI systems by the asset management industry. As for the technological development, they argue that it can make AI more and more attractive to the industry due to, among other things, growing computational capacity, greater explainability also of data and algorithms, a decrease in the cost of hardware components and data storage, greater availability of open source software components, and an increase in both the amount and the quality of available data. As for the regulatory development, the company considers as crucial the evolution of regulation supporting and facilitating innovation. And to conclude, the results of our survey show that the AI systems can be important tools for financial intermediaries. They are already considered important tools by the intermediaries, in particular within the asset management services. These tools are already used to enhance a variety of processes. First of all, the investment process, and it is expected that in their use will be more and more common in the future. However, good governance of AI systems is crucial as it can support the achievement of the full potential of these technologies by ensuring that possible emerging risks are properly addressed. And this is an issue already on the agenda of the Italian large asset management companies. And with this, I have done very well. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very, very much. A very interesting presentation since of a very interesting paper, actually. And as I said in the beginning, I think it's very important that Consob addresses and assesses what actually market participants are doing. Without further ado, because I'm actually mindful of the fact that we're running a little bit late, I will leave the floor to Andrea Paltinieri, who's a colleague professor at Università Cattolica. Thank you very much, Andrea.
Thanks, Marina, for having me, and hopefully you are able to see my presentation. At full screen is okay right now? Okay. So thanks again, Marina, for having me, and thanks, Valeria, for the very good presentation. Actually, it's an hard work on my side to discuss this paper because it's well done, and my main expertise right now is related to the cryptocurrency and on other alternative assets, like natural gas and so on. So I will try to have an overview of this paper, and then I will try to insert this very good paper into the academic literature. I do think this is, my main contribution I can do in this discussion, because actually the aim of the paper is much larger compared to what Valeria has greatly discussed over during the past 10 minutes, because in the paper there are risks, opportunities, developments of the use of the artificial intelligence technologies in financial intermediations. And so we have the first part dealing with the definition of the different techniques, and with the portfolio management I read carefully as well, because there are a lot of definitions that can create a lot of confusion if a non-expert approaches into this field. So the survey, was well done. You have 8 asset management companies with around 60% of the total asset under management, and methodologically side was well done, and the results were clearly exposed by Valeria just before. But the third part is even more important, related to the investor protection. So we have all the analysis of the benefits and risk for the investors. So my general comments related to the paper are, very informative. We already published in the fintech, section of Quaderni, a good set of definitions, the relation among artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, with a lot of policy implication at the end of the paper. This paper gives us a strong background of artificial intelligence, and with good surveys. And I would say I do think we have a lot of contribution, not only on the academic side, but on the practitioner side. And I'm telling you right now, there are not many works assessing artificial intelligence, and especially asset wealth management on the academic side as well. We also have robust appendix at the end of each section, so very difficult for me to find weaknesses. And so I asked myself how to conduct this discussion. And so my idea was just to give you a framework and a potential really contribution of this paper within the not so large academic literature actually dealing with artificial intelligence and machine learning, because as you can see on those 2 good literature reviews, Miretta and Ferrer in 2022, they reviewed the machine learning for asset management, but especially my colleague and friend John Gooder with other guys ran this good bibliometric analysis on artificial intelligence and machine learning, trying to identify what has been done in the academic literature with a lot of clusters related to artificial intelligence and machine learning. And, assessing this literature, I can easily say that this paper has a lot of contribution. But let's give you some academic profile of this relatively new framework. You see that the number of articles related to the artificial intelligence and machine learning is not huge. Just over the last couple of years, we have some academic interest on that, and especially, not in the top journal. And, that's why this, new field needs to have more investigation. But historically, what I can say about that, I can say that the artificial intelligence in the asset management is really a new field. Because as in the introduction we said, there are different clusters related to the artificial intelligence and machine learning. So you see a lot of analysis made in the past dealing with the financial distress, the corporate failure, even the high frequency trading has been investigated in the past, and the robo-advisor as well. So right now we have also the forecasting and the use of machine learning in the forecasting, and the Consob paper also dealt with it in the first chapter, and even the text mining, the financial fraud. And so the pricing and valuation and the asset management is just one of the thematic clusters of this very large field, and they can open a new contribution. Because if you analyze the different historical periods, again, in this academic research, in this academic research, what we can say, there are different sub-periods. For example, in this analysis, we have papers dealing with AI and machine learning from 1986 to 2021. And so in 1986, we all know that AI was not, maybe didn't already exist. And so we had different academic investigations relating especially on the pricing and valuation. You see a lot of paper related on the optimization, on the Markov switching model, on the mathematical finance. But again, up to 2009, really the academic research was pretty thin about this topic. Just from 2009 to 2012, we have some further analysis related to the text classification and investor behavior. But the more we go ahead, the more we see a lot of connections between among different topics. And here you can see the literature review in 2012 and 2015 period. You see a lot of clusters. And so from 2012, we have some analysis related to the fraud, to the text mining. And here from 2012, really the artificial intelligence has been investigated from the, started to be investigating from the academic style. And on the other side, we can say the 2018-2021 period where the investment and the financial front, that again, here the machine learning started to be important also on the academic side. And so this is the final cluster up to now. So where we are, not only the practitioner, but on the academic side, we are right now connecting the artificial intelligence, the machine learning with other relatively new topics like crowdfunding, like the peer-to-peer lending, like the financial inclusion as well, and again, like the asset management and the wealth management. And that's why I'm telling you, this is a very good paper, because even on the academic side, you make a good contribution with, I would say, this case study on the asset management industry in Italy with a good survey. And I really suggest also, my colleagues to go deep inside this new analysis related to the asset management, and not only also to the banks. And my future, some idea for future research question also the Consob side, because all the fintech quaderni section is amazing. And so my idea right now is that we can have a really new field of research dealing with machine learning asset pricing, with, for example, some modeling for the dynamics of market equity risk premium on the one side. But on the other side, we cannot forget the fact that with the machine learning, we can predict. We can predict a lot of factors. We can predict foreign direct investment. We can predict market variables. And so I do think that harder than using it in strategical asset allocation and tactical asset allocation, we can also predict a lot of variables, and not just on the robo-advisor and digital advisory side. So again, maybe the future could be also who invest in artificial intelligence. So who are the main actors? And even I also found something in the paper. So again, good job for this paper, very interesting. I reread 4 times, and I do think it sets a good framework for people that are willing to understand artificial intelligence, machine learning in the overall environment of asset management. So thank you again, Marina, for invitation, and hopefully you can find something usable in my presentation.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Very, very interesting. I think you're perfectly right regarding the importance of conducting research on cutting edge innovation, which is taking place on the market, even though it is very challenging for us academics, because we always have a stretch to understand how to actually write academically appropriate scientific contributions in this domain. But I also very much appreciated the very commendable paper that you discussed, I think rather brilliantly, actually. And so I know that, I'm mindful of the fact that we've completely eaten up the time of the Q&A, but I guess that we can devote a few minutes to the Q&A. And actually, if Commissioner Comporti has some comments, this is the time. I see that Alp Eroglu has already put his hand up, so people, you're very welcome. We're going to have a very short Q&A session because everybody I know has to rush away, but Alp, please go ahead. Thank you very much.
Okay, my quick question to Mari, and it was very interesting and enlightening, the findings of their research. And that's basically, it reminded me the discussion in asset management about active versus passive investment when you talked about the use of robo-advice. And apparently it's improving lots of things, like you talked about financial inclusion and increasing levels of portfolio reallocation, all those kinds of stuff. But it wasn't clear to me whether it really improved the returns for retail investors. So I think that will be really the critical and decisive points. You talked about 2/3 of investors. There was some statistical data there as well, but is there any insights on whether it's really helping in that sense? I think that will be really the decisive factor in terms of the future of the technology.
Yes, thanks a lot for this great question, and also thanks for the discussion. I really enjoyed the discussion that you organized. So yes, we find an improvement in return. So in the paper in the research paper we look at a relatively short time period of 2 years, and we find an improvement in return by 3%. And from this 3% return, so we have various measures of return, either risk adjusted or not, but it's more or less 3%. And 2/3 of that is coming from the rebalancing behavior. 1% is due to the more active risk taking that is taken by participants, so that they improve the efficiency of their asset allocation by in particular increasing their level of risk exposure. So yes, that's what we find, and now we are currently working on expansion of this data, on more recent data, and this is confirmed. So we are also including the COVID period. And we find that this return improvement is relatively stable. We also looked at expected return based on very long historical returns. So that's what we find. But it's one robo-advisor. Is it true for all robo-advisors? The other academic papers that I was quoting, they typically find a return improvement as well. Not necessarily for all participants, but in average, they tend to be quite positive on that dimension as well. So thanks for your question.
Glad to hear that. Thanks for the explanation.
Thank you very much. Any other comments, remarks? Okay, then just let me conclude with a couple of housekeeping details. The presentations will be put on the Consob and the Sapienza websites. Also, the registration will be provided. And thank you everybody for a very instructive and thought-provoking morning, at least for myself. I learned many new things, very interesting things. And let me leave the floor for her concluding remarks, for her conclusions, to Nadia Linciano. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marina. It was a great workshop. Thanks to all the presenters and the speakers and the discussants. Many food for thought, a lot of food for thought. As we are running a very short time, I would like to underline just what is the main takeaway to me. That is, we still need to keep humans in the loop. And it is asked for by investors, by financial decision makers, Also, Marie pointed this out. We also found it in some Consob research published again in the FinTech working paper series. We ran a focus group, a couple of focus groups in order to understand the demand for robo-advice. And we found out that beyond financial knowledge and digital knowledge, one of the key hurdles towards the acceptance of the robo-advice technology is the need to trust algorithms, to understand and the fact that they might be a black box is of course a hurdle. Also, it is acknowledged by market participants, as shown by the survey presented by Valeria, and it is well acknowledged by financial regulators and financial supervisors. Let me also underline that, as pointed out by all the speakers, things are much more complex than they look like. So, for instance, we in order to really ascertain benefits and risks of artificial intelligence in asset and wealth management, we need evidence. We need rigorous analysis. For instance, we may believe and we may share the idea that artificial intelligence may enhance financial inclusion, may enhance financial market participation. But in fact, in Italy, for instance, we see that robo-advisor is more widespread among wealthier individuals that are used to invest, that are experienced investors. And also that financial knowledge and digital knowledge are key to technology acceptance. So if one wants to enhance individuals' attitude towards artificial intelligence and technology in general, then one has to be aware of the levers that need to use, such as, for instance, financial education or digital education, in order to prompt this result. So to this respect, I think that we really need further research and cooperation among the academia and institutions and the financial regulators is key. And I want to thank again Marina Broggi and La Sapienza for for giving Consob the opportunity to define a fora where we can reach students, the academia and regulators and domestic and financial institutions. And I really do hope that we will keep on with this fruitful cooperation also next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And so